give people a couple of minutes to join and then get started. Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining today's webinar on capabilities and permissions. Just give me a few couple of minutes. We're having a bit of technical difficulties. I'll be with you shortly. My name is Ansel Gomes, and I'm part of the support team. You might have come across my name when reaching out for assistance with cases or issues. In this session, we'll dive into what capabilities and permissions are in Workbooks and how you can use them to manage user access and record security. As you know, we host webinars every other Wednesday at 4 p.m. UK time. On the screen, you can see the topics we've covered recently and what's coming up next. If you'd like to explore these topics in more depth, we also run a 2-day training course for system admins and reporting. For more information, you can reach out to your account manager or email us at training@workbooks.com. With that in mind, here's a quick overview of what's in today's agenda. We'll start with what capabilities are, where to find them, and how to add them. Then move on to permissions, looking at the difference between standard permissions and permissions with advanced security. Next, we'll cover the difference between capabilities and permissions and understand why they are both important. After that, we'll take a closer look at advanced security and discuss mandatory permissions, sharing policies, and rule sets. We'll also run through a worked example using advanced security to set permissions, and then finally move on to learn how to manage permissions with queues. And then finish up with time for questions. Just to let you know, this session is being recorded, so you'll be able to watch it again anytime. So what are capabilities? Capabilities determine the areas of Workbooks environment a user can access. A user's ability to carry out certain tasks and specific areas of Workbooks is controlled by capabilities assigned to them. Rather than assigning a long list of capabilities to each individual user, Workbooks organizes them into user groups based on typical roles within teams. If a user belongs to multiple groups, they don't just get capabilities of one group. They receive all the capabilities from every group they are a member of. These capabilities are cumulative, which means they build up and combine rather than replace each other. So if a user is in 2 or 3 groups, they will get a full set of capabilities from each of those groups together. For example, at the top of the slide, you see a total of 8 capabilities. Each group is assigned specific capabilities. For example, Group A might have capabilities 1, 2, and 3. As I mentioned, capabilities are cumulative. Take the purple user on the left as an example. They are both in Group A and Group B. From Group A, they get capabilities 1, 2, and 3. and from group B, they get capabilities 3, 4, and 5. Put together, the purple user ends up with capabilities 1 through 5. Now look at the green user, who's in group B and group C. They inherit capabilities 3, 4, and 5 from group B and 6, 7, and 8 from group C. Altogether, that gives them capabilities 3 through 8. The takeaway here is simple. Capabilities always add up. Whatever group a user belongs to, they receive all the capabilities from each group. Next, where can you find these capabilities and add them? To see capabilities assigned to each group, navigate to Start, Config, User and Security, User Group. Within each user group, you can also add new users or assign additional capabilities. For example, in this screenshot, we're looking at the Marketing Executive Group. The Add Capabilities button is highlighted by the red box, and you can click this button to add capabilities to each group. If you want to view a list of all capabilities in your database, or if you're unsure whether a specific capability exists, you can select the System Admin user group. Since the System Admin group has all capabilities in the database, this will give you a complete list of all capabilities. Now that we've covered capabilities briefly and how they are managed through user groups, let's move on to introducing permissions. Permissions complement capabilities to give you a detailed control over security access in workbooks. All individual records in workbooks have a set of sharing permissions which control who can view and modify that record. Permissions can be viewed by clicking on the padlock icon in the top right-hand corner of every record. There are 5 types of permissions you can see when clicking the icon: read, modify, delete, change ownership, and change permission. For example, to check permissions on this sales lead record, click the padlock icon in the top right-hand corner, highlighted by the red box. Here you can see the record owner, Anthony Khan, along with the system admin and limited system admin groups have full access. However, the everyone group has only limited access with read and write permissions. Let's say you want to remove access from the everyone group and instead give access to a group called managers. To do this, you simply click the X button highlighted by the red box in the screenshot to remove the everyone group. Then press the Add Rule button, which is highlighted by the red box, and choose the managers group from the drop-down list. In this example, I've given the managers group full access, and then press Save and Close. You will have to save and close the record for the permissions to apply. Now, it's very important to note here that permissions have already been changed for this specific sales lead record. Permissions for all other sales lead record and workbooks remain unchanged. Now that you've got a basic understanding of capabilities and permissions, let's understand the difference between these two. Capabilities define what actions a user can take, whereas permissions define which records those actions can be applied to. An easy way to think about this is using keys and a house as an example. Capabilities are like the type of key you have. For example, a key that lets you open doors or a master key that lets you lock and unlock. It determines what actions you can do. Whereas permissions are like which rooms in the house you can use the key on. You might have the ability to unlock doors, but only certain rooms are yours to open. Let me explain this further with a concrete example using sales leads. These examples will demonstrate how different combination of capabilities and record level permissions determine what a user can see and do. For instance, imagine a scenario where the user has modified permissions for a sales lead, highlighted by the red box in the screenshot, but does not have the view sales lead capability. Let's say they navigate to the sales lead landing page and search for some leads. What happens? Even though their sales permissions allow them to modify, the lead will only open in read-only mode. You can also notice here the buttons like convert and delete on the sales lead are missing. And that is because the user does not have the modify sales lead capability. Now, let's move on to the next example. In this scenario, the user has modify sales lead capability, but does not have the view sales lead capability. Here's what might happen. The sales lead landing page will not appear in the menu structure. However, the user can still search for and find leads using the lead object reference, as long as the user has the read or read and modify permission for that specific record. Let's break this down even further. Say if a user only has read permission, they can find the record, but if they open it, they might encounter an error like the one shown on the screen. If the user has both read and modify permission, then they can find the record, open it, and save changes without any issues. Finally, let's look at our last scenario where the user has both view and modify sales lead capabilities. In this case, the user will be able to navigate the sales lead landing page from the menu, then search for leads as usual. If their access permission only allows read, the lead will open in read-only mode. If they have read and modify access, they can open leads in edit mode and make changes directly. I really hope that this helped understand the difference between capabilities and permissions. From this slide onward, I'll be diving into permissions in a bit more detail. So permissions and permissions with advanced security. So what are standard permissions? When a new Workbooks account is created, it comes with a set of standard out-of-box permissions. By default, users can see and edit records. This is called public read and write access. However, if a user owns the record or is part of the system admin group, they get full access, meaning they can read, modify, delete, change owner, and change permissions. While many records have public read and write access, some records are shipped with private rule set. Examples of private rule set records include API data, accounting objects, bulk actions, and more. Permissions with advanced security. Advanced security is all about limiting access to information that's unnecessary or restricted. With this module, we can set up custom rule sets so certain groups or users get the right level of access. That could be controlling who can access, modify, or delete records. To switch to advanced security, you'll need a pro license or you'll need to purchase the advanced security module. Now, these screenshots are taken from configuration under users and security. On the left, without advanced security, there is no permission section. But on the right, with advanced security, a permission section appears where permissions can be controlled. In the next few slides, I'll move on to discuss advanced security in detail and its subsets, mandatory permissions, and sharing policy rule sets. Here's a Venn diagram I'll use to explain how permissions work with advanced security. The orange circle on the left represents mandatory permissions on a record, and the green circle on the right represents sharing policies and rule sets. Where the circle overlaps shows the combined access a user receives on a record. As I mentioned earlier, permissions are cumulative, so this diagram is a simplified way to visualize it. Think of the overlap as a way to highlight how mandatory rules and sharing policies work together. When a new record is created, the user's effective permissions are determined by both mandatory permissions, and sharing policies in place at that moment. Now, where do you find them? When you click on permissions, you'll see the two tabs at the top, one for sharing policies and one for mandatory permissions. Under each, you'll also see rule sets, which we'll go over in more detail in the next few slides. So what are mandatory permissions? These are base level permissions that are always in place for a record. Each record has a one-to-one relationship with its mandatory permission, meaning there's only one per record. Mandatory permissions are managed through mandatory rule sets, which ensure a minimum set of capabilities is always enforced across all objects. It is important to note here that these mandatory permissions cannot be changed at the individual record level via the padlock icon. And once they're set, we generally recommend not deleting or altering them unless there's a very strong reason to do so. Here, you can see an example of a mandatory rule set called minimum access. In this case, the rule set is assigned to every object type or record type in Workbooks. Let's take activities as an example and see what minimum access means for them. You can click on Manage these rule sets by clicking on Manage Mandatory Rule Sets. Under Mandatory Rule Set, the system admin has full access here. And the Everyone group, on the other hand, just has read access, but only on the items they own. And finally, the Limited Access admin group has full access on any item. One tip when creating a mandatory rule set is to always leave a description or a comment. This helps explain the purpose of the rule set and makes it easier to manage later. Like I mentioned earlier, you can quickly spot mandatory permissions when you check the permissions on a record. Just click on the padlock icon and you'll notice the mandatory permissions are grayed out, like what you can see on the slide. I know that in the screenshot, the gray might not be super clear, so I recommend trying it yourself in Workbooks. Simply click on the padlock on any record, and you'll see the difference right away. Now let's talk about sharing policies. Sharing policies are an additional set of permissions that sit on top of mandatory permissions. They apply permissions to different user groups, and you can apply multiple sharing policies to a single record. Both these sharing policies and rule sets can be edited or deleted by the system admin group. Here, you can see an example for cases. Here there are 5 sharing policies assigned to different user groups, each with its own rule set. If you want to find out what these rule sets tab like private, UK rule set, or the US rule set mean, you can click on Manage Rule Sets to see the details. For example, let's look at the UK rule set. In this setup, the UK staff group has full access to any items they own. In addition, they also have read and modify access to items owned by others. So what does this mean in practice? It means that every member of the UK staff group can do everything, that is, read, update, delete the records they own. But beyond that, they also have the ability to read and modify records that belong to all users in the UK group. Next, when do these sharing policies apply? Sharing policies can be applied in 2 ways. At record creation, this happens by default, or when the record owner changes, typically on assignment, and this behavior is set on mandatory rule set policies within mandatory permissions. In the first screenshot, you can see the mandatory rule set for counting objects. Under object type settings, The apply sharing policies option is currently set at only at creation, though you can select either option from the drop-down. In the second screenshot, taken from sharing policies, you can identify how policies are applied by looking at the created at or owned by. For example, from the screenshot, you can see that for campaigns, sharing policy applies when the record owner changes, while for comments, the policy applies at record creation. Now, I'm going to walk you through an example of how you can use advanced security to set permissions. In this case, the record type we're working with is opportunities. Let's imagine you have two sales teams, one in the UK and one in France, plus a management team that works across both regions. Here's the task. We need to set permissions such that the UK and France teams can only share opportunities with their own teammates. They shouldn't be able to see each other's opportunities. At the same time, the management team should have full visibility across all opportunities. Let's now switch to Workbooks so I can show you how this is done. We'll go through this in just 5 simple steps. So step 1 is creating user groups. To do that, you go to Start, Configuration, Users and Security, User Groups. To save time today, I've already set these up. I've created groups for UK sales team, which is just there, the France sales team, and the management team. The salespeople have already been added to their respective groups, and the managers also have been added to the management group. Step 2 is to change when the sharing policy applies. To do that, click on Permissions, and then Mandatory Permissions. And then we look for Opportunities. Click on Opportunities, open it, and under Object Type Settings, you can see Apply Sharing Policies. We switch it from only at creation to when ownership changes. This ensures that sharing rules are reapplied when ownership of the record changes. And then click Save and Close. Step 3 is to change the sharing rule set for the existing policy. To do that, go to Sharing Policies, and then look for Opportunities. And then we change this from public read and write to private. This means that only users who own an opportunity has full access to it by default. Next, we create new rule sets for UK and France. To do that, you click Manage Rule Sets, and then New Rule Set. I'm going to first create the rule set for the UK staff team. So I'm just going to put UK sales. And then put in a comment like, give users in the UK sales team full access to any item, and give users in the sales manager full access to any item. Under rules, I'll then look for the UK team, the UK sales team, and give full access to any item. Then I'm also going to include the sales manager team and give full access to any item. And save and close. I've already done the same for the France sales team. So I've added a comment and given full access to the France sales team and the sales manager group. So step 5 and the final step is to create new sharing policies. To do that, you press Add Sharing Policy. Under Object Type, there'll be Opportunities. Owned by the UK team with sharing rule set UK sales, and add a comment like sharing policy used by the UK sales team. Save and close. I've done the same for the France sales team. And that's it. With this in place, the UK and France team can only see and share what opportunities are within their own teams, while the management team still has full visibility across all opportunities. Now imagine we originally had opportunities shared with both UK and France teams, and now we've introduced stricter rules so that each team can only see their own opportunities. Those new policies will not be automatically applied to the opportunities that were already existed. It is important to note that new sharing rules only apply to opportunities created after this change. So how do we bring old records in line with the new rules? The process here is simple. Head to the record landing page, select bulk action, and then choose recalculate permissions. When you do this, Workbooks updates all existing opportunities so they follow the new policy. But one caution here. If users have manually modified access permissions on individual records, these will be overwritten by a recalculation run, and you will get a message like the one in the first screenshot, alerting you of this. Second, and very important, never recalculate permissions on own organization. Doing so can reset all access settings, which may prevent even the record owner from seeing or editing a record. When recalculating permissions on the org landing page, make sure you add a filter to exclude ONORG. And now we've reached the final topic of my presentation, permissions on queues. As you remember, sharing policies can be applied based on who created the record or who currently owns the record. As said on the mandatory policy, this means access to a record might change when the record is reassigned. In most cases, when you assign a record to a user, ownership moves to that user. However, queues work a little different. When you assign a record to a queue, ownership does not automatically change. The record stays owned by the user it was previously assigned to. Because of this, other people in the queue won't automatically get access unless the queue is configured to allow this. For example, imagine William owns a record. He can read and edit it. If we assign this record to the support queue, William still stays as the owner, and so he has access. By default, Other queue members cannot edit it. But if the queue has a rule set or sharing policies applied to it, for example, public read and write, those team members can now see or edit the record, even though they technically don't own it. You can set up a queue rule set to manage this. Here's how you do it. Navigate to the record landing page. In this example cases, click on Manage Queues, select a queue, and under Sharing Policy, tick on Assignment and select your rule set. Once this is done, any record added to the queue will follow the rule set's permission instead of just the original owner's permission. I've now reached the end of my presentation, so let's quickly summarize what we covered in today's webinar. Capabilities. Capabilities define what actions a user can perform, such as viewing, modifying, or deleting records. These capabilities are assigned through user groups, meaning that they inherit capabilities from the groups they belong. And importantly, capabilities are cumulative. If a user belongs to multiple groups, they get them all from all combined capabilities. Permissions. Permissions determine which records those actions apply to. You can view a record's permission by clicking on the padlock icon on the record. And there are two types of permissions: standard permissions and advanced security. Standard permissions are out-of-box permissions. By default, most records have public read and write access. Some records like API data, accounting objects, bulk actions, dashboards, etc., come with a private rule set. You cannot change mandatory permissions or default sharing rules in sharing permissions, but you can change individual permissions and control capabilities within user groups. Advanced security gives you more control. You can restrict access to sensitive information using custom rule sets for specific users or groups. It allows you to change mandatory permissions, adjust default sharing rules, and base permissions on record ownership versus who created it. Under advanced security, we did talk about mandatory permissions and sharing policies. Mandatory permissions are base level permissions that are always enforced. Each record has one mandatory rule set. These cannot be changed for individual records via the padlock, and we generally recommend only changing them if there's a strong business reason. Whereas sharing policies are extra permissions layered on top of mandatory permissions. They can be applied to multiple user groups and can be changed at the individual record level via the padlock or by system admins. Recalculate permissions. If you make changes to policies, you can use recalculate permissions bulk action to update existing records. But just a word of caution here, do not recalculate permissions on own organization, which is org1. Doing so can remove access to your own records. And our final topic was permissions on queues. When a record is assigned to a queue, ownership does not automatically change. To allow queue members to access or edit records, you will need to configure a queue rule set. And this is done by going to record type, selecting manage queue, editing a queue, and then ticking on assignment and then selecting a rule set. And that's a summary of all that I've covered in today's webinar. And do we have any questions? As there are no questions currently, I just want to talk about our next webinar. Our next webinar is on import basics. and it's scheduled for the 1st of October. So we hope to see you all on that one. If you still have questions or would like some help regarding capabilities and permissions, please do check out our knowledge base, as we have lots of information and resources on there. You can find it within Workbooks by clicking the help icon, or by going onto our knowledge base. In addition to that, authorized support contacts can contact the support team by email, phone, or using our case portal. Alternatively, you can also contact your account manager, who will also be more than happy to assist or at least point you in the right direction. And finally, we do have videos on our website on the following topics displayed on the screen. You will also be able to find recordings for this along with previous webinars at the link on the screen and select webinar recordings. And that's everything for today. Thank you all again for taking time out of your busy schedule to tune in. We'll look forward to seeing you on the next one in a couple of weeks. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.